What if I told you that the greatest proof of Jesus Christ was hidden in the religion of ancient Egypt? What if the Vikings, thousands of years before the Gospel was written, were already telling his story? What if every civilization on Earth, independently, separately, with no contact with each other, was reaching for the same truth? And what if the reason they were all reaching for the same thing is because God wrote it into them? This is not a coincidence. This is not mythology. This is the fingerprint of God, pressed into the clay of every culture, every people, every human heart, long before the moment he stepped into history to fulfill it all. My name doesn't matter. What matters is this: Jesus Christ is not one story among many. He is the story that every other story was pointing to, and today I'm going to show you the evidence. Let's start 2,500 years before the birth of Christ. In ancient Egypt, carved into the walls of their pyramids, is the oldest resurrection story ever recorded. His name was Osiris. Osiris was the king of Egypt, righteous, wise, beloved by his people. He taught them agriculture, gave them music, and ruled with justice. The ancient texts call him the good king, the shepherd of his people. But his brother Set, the god of chaos, was consumed with envy. So Set devised a trap. He crafted a beautiful chest, lured Osiris into it at a feast, sealed it, and threw it into the Nile. The good king was dead, betrayed by someone close to him, killed not because he was guilty, but because darkness could not stand his goodness. His wife Isis left the palace and wandered the earth barefoot, weeping, searching for him. When she finally found his body, Set had already dismembered it into 14 pieces and scattered them across Egypt. Isis gathered every piece. She reassembled him. She breathed life back into him, and Osiris rose, not to return to life as it was, but to become the lord of the underworld, the judge of souls, the one before whom every person would one day stand to have their heart weighed. The Egyptians rehearsed this story every single year. Priests would carry statues of Osiris down the Nile. The people would mourn in the streets, and then they would erupt in celebration as the god rose again. For 3,000 years, the greatest civilization on Earth organized its entire understanding of death, judgment, the afterlife, and resurrection around this story. Now, here is what the skeptics want you to think. They say, "See? This proves Jesus is a myth. The Christians copied from Egypt." But hold on, because that argument falls apart the moment you read the actual details. Osiris never truly returned to life on Earth. He remained in the underworld. He became the king of the dead, not the living. The Egyptologist Henri Frankfort from the University of Chicago put it plainly: Osiris was not a dying god at all, but a dead god. He never returned among the living. Jesus walked out of that tomb. He ate breakfast with his disciples on the shore of Galilee. He appeared to over 500 people who were still alive when Paul was writing about it. He walked back into this world in a glorified physical body, and 40 days later ascended visibly into heaven. No one was writing prayers asking Osiris for resurrection on earth. They were asking him for a decent place in the underworld. That is not the same story. So if they're not the same story, why does Egypt have a version of it at all? I'll tell you why. Because the author of all things was already laying down a trail. He planted the shadow of the story in Egypt, and then, at the right time, he stepped into human history to be the substance. Now travel with me to Scandinavia, to a world of ice and fire, of Vikings and gods, thousands of miles from Egypt, no shared language, no shared culture, no possibility of borrowing, and yet they were telling the same story. His name has been lost to time, but the Norse called him the god of light, the most beloved of all the gods. So radiant and pure that light itself poured from him. Everything that was right and true seemed to be concentrated in this one divine figure. But this god of light began having visions of his own death. His mother traveled the entire universe extracting a solemn oath from every creature, every plant, every stone, that nothing would ever harm her son. But she missed one thing: a small, seemingly insignificant plant, mistletoe. The deceiver, the trickster, found this out. At a gathering of the gods, while they were celebrating the god of light's invincibility by throwing things at him and laughing as they all bounced off, the deceiver guided the hand of this god of light's blind twin brother to throw a dart of mistletoe. The purest, most beloved being in all of creation was killed, not by an enemy who hated him, but through deception, through a trusted figure, through something that should have been harmless. All of creation mourned his death. The Norse texts say that every creature wept. And then, hear this, the ancient prophecy says, after the old world ends, he returns. He rises. He comes back to inhabit a new world, a new creation, remade and restored. The god of light, crucified by treachery, prophesied to return and fill a new creation with his presence. Ask yourself, how did Vikings in Scandinavia, with no Bible, no contact with Israel, no knowledge of the plans of God, arrive at that same shape of story? There is only one explanation that makes sense. The same God who would one day send his Son into the world, that God was already writing the preview into the dreams of every people on earth. Go back even further, to Sumer, the world's first civilization, in what is now Iraq, over 4,000 years ago. They worshipped a god named Tammuz, a shepherd, a god of life and agriculture who loved his people. Every year Tammuz descended into the underworld, and every year the people of Sumer would go into public mourning, weeping, lamenting, calling out for the god who had gone below. This is so significant that the name Tammuz appears in the Bible itself. In the book of Ezekiel, the prophet is shown a vision of women at the very gates of the temple in Jerusalem, weeping for Tammuz. The practice had spread so far across the ancient world that it had crept into the holy city. A shepherd god, who descended, who was mourned with weeping, who returned and brought life back with him. A shepherd. I am the good shepherd, Jesus said. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. 4,000 years before he said it, Sumer was already weeping for a shepherd who had gone down. Across in India, the ancient Hindu scriptures describe Krishna, an avatar, a direct incarnation of the divine god Vishnu, who came to earth in human form. Born under miraculous circumstances, his birth was a threat to a king who sought to kill him. He grew to be a teacher of extraordinary wisdom. He died a sacrificial death, and his divine spirit ascended back to God. The Bhagavad Gita records Krishna saying, "I am the beginning, the middle, and the end of all beings." Across in Greece, Dionysus, the son of Zeus, the king of the gods, was born of a divine father and a mortal woman. In his ancient myths, he was killed, torn apart, and then brought back to life. His worship centered on bread and wine, given as symbols of his body and his blood poured out as a gift of life to humanity. Read that again. Bread and wine. The body, the blood, offered for the life of the world. Now, I want to be careful here, because I love truth, and truth requires honesty. Some of the popular comparisons you see online, where people claim these gods were crucified or born on December 25th, are exaggerated or simply false. Scholars have examined those claims and found them built on thin air, but here is what is absolutely true. Across every culture on Earth, independently, without coordination, there is a longing for the same thing: God becoming human, a sacrifice that costs everything, life emerging from death, a way for broken people to stand before a holy God. The details differ, the shape is the same, and that shape has a name. One autumn evening in 1931, a man named C.S. Lewis, a professor of literature at Oxford, a former atheist who knew these ancient myths better than almost anyone alive, was walking through the grounds of Magdalen College with his friend J.R.R. Tolkien. Lewis had almost become a Christian, but he kept stumbling over one thing. He said to Tolkien, "The Jesus story feels like just another myth, the dying God who rises. I've read this in 100 forms." And Tolkien said something that cracked Lewis wide open. He said, I'm paraphrasing, "Jack, you feel the truth in these myths because they are echoes of the truth. God is the great storyteller. Before he told the true story in history, he was already planting the shape of it in the hearts of every people on earth. The myths aren't evidence against Christianity. They are preparations for it. They are the longing that God himself put in the human heart, so that when the real thing arrived, it would ring true." 2 weeks later, Lewis became a Christian. He later wrote, "The heart of Christianity is a myth which is also a fact. The old myth of the dying God comes down from the heaven of legend and imagination to the earth of history. We pass from a Balder or an Osiris, dying nobody knows when or where, to a historical person crucified under Pontius Pilate." Do you see what he is saying? Osiris, nobody knows when. Tammuz, nobody knows where. Balder, no date, no location, no witnesses. Jesus of Nazareth, crucified on a Friday in Jerusalem under the Roman governor Pontius Pilate, whose existence is confirmed by Roman historians, by the Jewish historian Josephus, and by a stone inscription discovered in Caesarea Maritima in 1961. The myths were the shadow. Jesus was the light that cast it. The myths were the dream God gave humanity. Jesus was the morning they woke up. Now I want to talk about why Jesus is not just the best version of an old story. He is categorically, completely, historically different from every other figure in the ancient world. Here is what no dying and rising God ever claimed. No other God looked his followers in the eye and said, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live." No other God said, "Before Abraham was, I am," claiming to be the eternal God who spoke to Moses from the burning bush. No other God said to a paralyzed man, "Your sins are forgiven," and then healed him to prove he had the authority to say it. The Jewish teachers who heard Jesus make these claims didn't think he was being poetic. They picked up stones to throw at him. They understood exactly what he was claiming, equality with God, and they called it blasphemy. Jesus was either the most dangerous liar in human history, a madman with delusions of divinity, or he was exactly who he said he was. There is no comfortable middle ground, and here is what makes Jesus' story unlike every ancient myth. After his crucifixion, his followers didn't quietly drift away and preserve a comforting legend. What happened instead is one of the most historically explosive events in human history. 12 ordinary men, fishermen, tax collectors, a former terrorist, who had all run and hidden when Jesus was arrested. These same men, weeks later, stood up in the very city where he had been killed and publicly declared that God had raised him from the dead. They didn't just say it, they died for it. Peter, crucified upside down. Paul, beheaded in Rome. James, stoned to death. Stephen, stoned while praying for the people killing him. And here is the critical question that secular historians have never been able to adequately answer. People will die for a lie they believe is true, but no one dies for a lie they know is false. These men were eyewitnesses. They were not passing down a tradition they had heard. They were reporting what their own eyes had seen. And they went to their deaths rather than say it wasn't true. Even the atheist philosopher Antony Flew, one of the most famous atheists of the 20th century, admitted near the end of his life. The evidence for the resurrection is better than for claimed miracles in any other religion. It is outstandingly different in quality and quantity. The empty tomb was never explained away by the Romans or the Jewish leaders, and they had every reason to do so. The body of Jesus was never produced, though it would have ended Christianity overnight. Instead, the Romans made the remarkable decision to station guards at the tomb, because even they knew something extraordinary was happening. The tomb was empty. 500 eyewitnesses saw him alive. His brother James, who didn't believe in him during his ministry, became one of the leaders of the early church and died rather than deny the resurrection. You don't get converted to belief in your brother's divinity unless something utterly undeniable happened. This is not mythology. This is history. So why did every civilization tell the same story? Here is what I believe with everything in me. Because God is not a God who leaves any people without a witness. From the very beginning, before the law of Moses, before the prophets, before the written word, God was writing his redemption story into the fabric of human consciousness. He pressed the shape of the gospel into the heart of every culture that would ever live. The Egyptians felt it and built Osiris. The Norse felt it and built Balder. The Sumerians felt it and wept for Tammuz. The Greeks felt it and poured wine for Dionysus. They were all holding pieces of a puzzle they couldn't complete, all reaching for something they couldn't quite name, all building shadows of a reality they hadn't yet seen. And then God said, "Enough shadows, enough echoes, enough dreams," and he sent his son. John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were made through him. In him was life, and that life was the light of all people. The Word, that organizing principle behind all of existence, the reason there is something rather than nothing, became flesh, moved into a neighborhood, walked on real roads, under a real sun, in a body that got tired and hungry and thirsty. And he said, "I am the way, the truth, the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Not a way, the way. Not a truth, the truth. Not a life among lives, the life itself. Every other dying and rising god stayed in the realm of symbol and myth. They pointed. Jesus arrived. He didn't come to add to the mythology. He came to fulfill it, to be the reality that all the shadows had been reaching toward. And he didn't just die and rise in a vague spiritual sense. He rose on a Sunday morning in a real tomb, outside a real city wall, and the stone was rolled away not to let him out, but to let us look in and see that he was gone. I started this video with a question: why did every ancient civilization tell the same story? And the answer is this: because God loved every people on earth enough to write his Son into their deepest dreams, long before the moment Jesus stepped into history to make those dreams real. The myths were not a competition to Christ, they were a preparation for him, and now the question is not about ancient civilizations, it's about you. You are watching this for a reason. Something in you responded to these words. Something recognized the shape of this story, not because you learned it somewhere, but because it was already there, because God wrote it into you too. Jesus Christ is not a myth. He is the living God who walked into time, took the punishment we deserved, rose from the dead with all authority in heaven and on earth, and is right now, at this very moment, making all things new. If you've never surrendered your life to him, that door is open, not because you're good enough, not because you figured everything out, but because he already paid the price to open it. Romans 10:9 says, "If you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved." That's it. That's the door. And it's open. It really is written in everything, and it's written for you. Next time, we're going to look at the 300 prophecies written about Jesus hundreds of years before he was born, specific details about where he'd be born, how he'd enter Jerusalem, the exact price of his betrayal, and the precise manner of his death. One mathematician calculated the odds of one man fulfilling just 8 of them by chance. The number will leave you speechless. Subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to see it. And may God open eyes that have never seen, and open hearts that have never surrendered.